you. I prepped it in 40 minutes. I can't tell how long it's going to take. It may be less, it may be more. We'll wing it as we go. Okay. Let's see if technology will work for me. We'll start with the past of and origins of the Society for Research on Identity Formation, and which later transformed to ISRI. And I titled this section of the talk, which I was the only part that I was going to do when I was going to split the presentation with Steve. He's very sorry that he was not able to attend. We did talk about what he was going to cover in his portion of the presentation, and a good part of that was going to be his recollections of his life within the organization and how it contributed to his professional development. And so when I prepared my remarks as well, there's a lot that are going to be recollections of my involvement in identity research over the years as it led up to the creation of the Society. Just a word about the subtitle of this section, present before the creation. This actually is an adaptation of a title of an autobiography by Dean Acheson, who's not a name you're likely to remember. He was Secretary of State in the United States under Truman. And I like the title of his autobiography. It was present at the creation. There was a certain modesty associated with that because he was actively involved in developing the policies that led to the rebuilding of Europe after the Second World War. So he wasn't just at present at the creation, he was one of the creators of it. Well, I wasn't involved in anything so momentous as the rebuilding of Europe, but I was present before the creation of the Society. I want to take us back to our intellectual heritage, so we're not just talking 30 years, we're now talking 60 years, or more than 60 years, if it's to Erickson's publication, Childhood in Society, and subsequently Identity, Youth, and Crisis. I had the pleasure, the honor of working for Erickson very, very briefly. For 1 week in the summer of 1978. He was giving a course, a 1-week course at Bennington College, and there were 7 of us, all Erickson scholars, who were recruited to be teaching assistants for him. And he would give a lecture in the morning, and we would run discussion groups in the afternoon. And if we chose to do so, and most of us did, we gave a presentation one evening to the people who were attending the course. We weren't paid for it. Our reward was we got to spend 1.5 hours each day with Erickson, and we could ask him anything we wanted to ask him. Marvelous experience. Jim Marsha, working off of Erickson's discussion of identity in Childhood in Society, developed the identity status interview, the whole identity status paradigm. Jim was a professor of mine in graduate school. I took one course with him, personality theories. And he was attracting a great number of graduate students to work with him, but foolishly I chose a different major professor and did a PhD thesis on a topic that was eminently forgettable, and after I got my PhD I promptly forgot it. After leaving State University of New York at Buffalo, where I did my graduate work, I was teaching at Rensselaer Polytech in Troy, New York, and the psychology majors there were all ex-engineers, engineering students. They had gone to RPI for engineering and decided it wasn't for them. Their identities were changing. And I say, hey, I can understand where they're coming from. This makes a great research topic. And I've already got the background from my past associations with Jim. So it took off very shortly after that. Jim's work attracted a lot of attention. There were a lot of people who began using the identity status paradigm. We're doing identity status interviews, and we were spread all over the country. Herschel and Ellen Thornburg ran a series of conferences for adolescent researchers during the 1980s. And that's where Sally and I got to meet Gerald Adams, Hal Rodevent, Ray Montemayor. This was where the first interpersonal connections with other identity researchers took place. This, conferences that Herschel and Ellen ran ultimately led to the creation of the Society for Research on Adolescence. And so now that organization was holding biennial meetings. They would meet during the off years for SRCD, Society for Research on Child Development. And so all of the identity researchers would gravitate to SRA meetings, and we formed our own special interest group within SRA. And so we would meet every other year. The first several years, we just referred to it as the Identity Research SIG, so the Special Interest Group. At one point, then, we decided we needed a more formal name for that. It would be nice to have a more formal name for that. I suspect I played a role in the choosing of the particular language that created SRIF, Society for Research on Identity Formation. We were primarily a group of developmentalists or personality theorists. Jim Marsh's identity status paradigm was very much directed toward the processes of identity formation. So it was natural that we would choose, somewhat inadvisedly in the long run, but that we would choose to refer to ourselves as Society for Research on Identity Formation. And we also could say that we could have called it Society for Research on Identity Development, but SRIF is so much nicer than SRID. During the SRA years, the first sets of meetings for that we had two coordinators. The original coordinator for the special interest group was Joe Lavoie, and he was followed by Phil Dreyer. It was Joe Lavoie who started the practice of everybody introducing themselves at the start of the conference. And he was a great supporter of students, whether it was undergraduates or graduate students, and quite intentionally, he wanted everybody to feel they had a voice in the organization from the very start, irrespective of what their academic rank might have been at a given point in time. And Phil Dreyer carried on that tradition of introductions as the starting point, and I'm delighted to see that that has continued for over 30 years as part of the group. Phil was he was a masterful MC. If you interacted with him, you felt immediately at ease and feeling included within the group. I'll say a little bit more about Phil in just a minute. Not only is a society a function, the history of the society, a function of the individuals who are founding the meetings, founding the society, carrying it forward. It's also a function of the landmark publications that they make. And one of the very first books on identity theory and identity research was produced by Gerald Adams, Tom Galata, and Ray Montemare. This is in 1992. Gerald, who was not just a founding member, he was one of the central people with the creation of the society. He was tall. He was very tall. And he had a gentle voice and a very pragmatic orientation to find solutions to whatever points of decision-making needed to be made within the organization. He was the originator of the first widely used paper and pencil instrument for the assessment of the identity statuses. The extended objective measure of identity status, otherwise known as the EOM-EIS, until one jokester during a presentation started referring to it as the EI-EIO. Okay. I'm not sure how well that translates to an international conference, but EI-EIO is the refrain from a children's song in the United States. Old MacDonald had a farm, EI-EIO. So, following the year saw the publication of Eco-Identity, a handbook for psychosocial research. Jim Marsha, myself, Dave Madison, Sally, and Jay Orlovsky were the authors. It was an odd way we did this, and we thought the publisher might object. We are the authors of the book, but we are also the authors by chapter. So each of our individual chapters is identified, but it doesn't make it into an edited book. We all worked on trading chapters back and forth. 1993 saw the publication of discussions on ego identity, edited by Jane Kroger. In 1992, Jane had invited a variety of the identity scholars to New Zealand for conversations. Each of us developed a presentation, and the rest of the attendees to that would have a question and answer in open discussion of the presentation, hence the discussions on ego identity. Mike Brzezinski, Jim Cote, Gene Finney, Sally and myself, several professors from New Zealand as well were part of that. Jane was president of SRIF from 2003 to 2005. I may leave out which years individuals were president of the organization, but they're up on the screen, and the presentation will cover everyone who has served as president of the organization. And then we have Sally's book on interventions for adolescent identity. This was the, Sally had a special issue, first of the Journal of Adolescence, and then this book was put together a couple of years later. This was the first time that materials relevant to interventions were brought together. I would credit Sally with being the first lifespan or nearly lifespan researcher on identity. One of her earliest studies involved high school students. Much of our research was done with college students, and Sally's was among the first studies done with adults. These were separate studies, so it's not the kind of marvelous longitudinal research that has now been done, but it was a start to look at identity across the lifespan. One other thing I want to mention regarding Sally is she always had a problem with Erickson's discussion of women. And so she brought a very strong feminist voice to the organization, and there were others among the founders and the members of the organization that held a similar orientation. Which brings me now to 1995, which was the year of Dog Island. I apologize to Dick and to Jeannie. I was not able to find pictures of them online. I even tried with their graduate students without success in getting photographs, so they have to be represented by silhouettes. Dog Island is a barrier island off the Florida coast, south of Tallahassee, where Florida State University is. And the Pelican Inn was the staging area for the conference. That not where we held our meetings. The meetings were actually held in the firehouse, but all of the arrangements, some of the people stayed in the Pelican Inn. Others, most of us stayed in residential houses on the island and made our way to the firehouse for the meetings itself. Sorry to say that we were there in 1995. The Pelican Inn closed down in 2016 and was destroyed by Hurricane Michael in 2018. So if anybody is thinking of a pilgrimage to Dog Island, you're not going to find the Pelican Inn anymore. One of the marvelous things that Dick and Jeannie did is they paired their students with the principal researchers who were attending Dog Island. And that's where I got to meet Seth Schwartz, who was a graduate student of Dick's. These pairings, they met us at the ferry that we took to the island. They helped us get us settled in wherever it was going to be in these private houses, and they were just generally available to us for anything that might be our needs during the time of the conference, and then would then shadow us while the conference itself was taking place. The pairing of Seth and I was prescient because not only did we stay in touch after Dog Island, but we have something over 12 joint publications from our joint interests and research studies. I served as the first president under the bylaws of the Society for Research on Identity Formation as an organization. Dog Island is 1995. As an organization, it took us 6 years before we were fully recognized by the federal government as a nonprofit organization. A tremendous amount of paperwork went in. We had to develop bylaws, we had to fill out government forms, we had to have an organized financial system with a treasurer and other people serving in designated roles. One of the things that's what we did at Dog Island. We first of all made a decision, did we want to be a professional organization, what we call a 501c3 organization. And it was by no means a certain outcome that we would say, yes, we did. Did we have the manpower? Did we have the people who were willing to do it, to serve as officers in an organization, given all of the other demands of an academic life? And the way it was, of course, yes, form an organization, because if we had decided otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Turns out, going through some materials to prepare for this presentation, I found a copy of the original program from Dog Island. I have it up here. I had to change the color of the cover of it because it matched exactly the background that I use on my slides. But if anybody wants to see the original program, and I found out I served as the program committee chair that particular year. Introduce you to other founding members of the organization: Jim Cote, a sociologist in a den of psychology. His was not necessarily the easiest introduction to the group, and he and I had a joint program in 1994 at the Coronado Hotel off of San Diego on that, and I was talking about the psychodynamic role, perspective on identity formation and what the person brings to it. And Jim was talking about, but it is within a social context, and how much of identity is in fact a function of the social world in which we live. And of course the answer is both. And we knew it at the time, and there was just a slight mock tone to making this a debate, because we already agreed in advance on what it was. But the debate format turned out to be a very good one for getting the issues on the table, and for getting people to look at what was going on from a variety of perspectives. Jim was the first editor of the journal Identity, and he became the second president of the organization. I was the first president of the organization and the second editor of the journal Identity. So we just exchanged roles on that. His presidency 2003 to 2005. Another member of the founding group was Jean Finney, and her work is well known on ethnic identity and bringing the Marcia identity status paradigm to the understanding of ethnic identity. She was president from 2007 to 2009. Hal Grodevin was not at Dog Island, but he was just about in every other meeting that I can think of. His work on family inputs and later on adoption and adoptive identity really makes it. So many of the people I'm talking here, I'm picking out one thing that was part of their professional activities, and virtually everyone has done so much more than I'm able to talk about. Bill Curtinas, again, a continuing, virtually at every meeting. He was the first treasurer of the organization, and in the preparation for getting the approval for professional organizational status, he played a crucial role. His research interests were in positive youth development and the creation of programming that would promote identity functioning in at-risk youth. Carol Marstrom, another continuing founding member of the organization. Some of her outstanding work was on coming-of-age ceremonies in Native American girls as identity-building experiences. She was also a country singer, and at one of the meetings, I forget which one, she gave a concert for SRIF. President from 2009 to 2011. Mike Brzezinski, a much more cognitive approach to understanding identity formation in contrast to the more psychodynamic approach that Jim Marcia had adopted. But Jim's identity styles, or rather Mike's identity styles, mapped very well onto Erickson's, or onto Marcia's identity statuses, and it really depended on whether you were psychodynamic in your orientation or whether you were cognitivist in your orientation, whether you preferred the statuses or preferred the styles. Randy Jones, very much interested in family contributions to identity formation. He had the wickedest sense of humor of any of the founding members of the society, E-I-E-I-O. Pat Raskin, we first met Pat Raskin when Sally and I gave a couple of workshops during the 1980s, and she was one of the people who attended the first of the workshops that we gave. She went on, she actually then took over that trainer's role and gave a workshop on identity interviewing and identity status scoring at Dog Island. She too was very much a feminist in her orientation and a practicing clinician as well. And that brings me to another landmark publication, this one in 2011, which is the 2-volume set Handbook of Identity Theory and Research, put together by Seth Swartz, Kuhn Lux, and Viv Ignoles. Just a tremendous undertaking. If you've called upon that volume, or the physical book itself, the number of contributors that were part of that process. Just a daunting task to put all that together. And I would hear the stories of authors who did not necessarily respond promptly. Okay, this would have been the point where Steve took over, and I need to say this part of my own reminiscences during these years as well. But there was a period of time for about 6 years when I was essentially out of the organization, did not participate in it. I gave a keynote speech in 2016 to the SRIF meeting in Baltimore. And in the year or so after that, Sally's cancer returned. And so our focus was entirely there. And after her passing, I just didn't have the psychological energy for professional activities. So I've relied for this section in part on conversations I've had with Steve, with Seth, with Renee, to fill in some of the gaps that I cannot speak to from personal knowledge. One of the things that, in looking over what happened during those years, since 2011, 2012, 4 themes really stood out for me. The internationalization of the society, the focus on interventions and the identity stress, the need for interventions, the development of the narrative identity paradigm, and the modernization, the new ways of thinking about things that we were talking about in the 1970s and the 1980s, but are now being studied in quite different ways from our early research. And I'll have something to say about each of these things. Internationalization is very clear, the broadening of the geographical membership of the society, my impression is that there was a massive shift in the center of research gravity from North America to Europe, and for the study of identity functioning. We have the change in the name of the society from Society for Research on Identity Formation to the International Society for Research on Identity. I confess I had a bit of nostalgia for the old name, but it was absolutely the appropriate thing to do, and to have done it at the time that it happened. Again, we have the internationalization in terms of the yearly conferences, first at Groningen, then in Milan, and now here. The leadership of the society has become truly international. There are at least 3 mistakes in this slide, for which I apologize. It was current, or I thought it was current 2 hours ago, but the names haven't changed, but the roles have. Kazumi is now our past president. Research I would choose to mention is her work on real-time identity functioning, the day-to-day activities, that way in which individuals live their identity. Ellie is now president, and because I'm an Ericksonian myself, I want to point out the marvelous work that he did in putting together the special issue of Identity for the 50th anniversary of the publication of Identity, Youth, and Crisis. And I was out of the loop at that time, or I would have certainly tried to get something into that particular issue. And then Elisabetta, as the first of the European chairs for the Identity Journal in the Society, and mentioning her work both on identity assessment and in large-scale identity longitudinal research. The work on interventions, in part, Steve Berman's contribution for understanding identity distress. To what extent are we finding individuals who need for intervention services? And Marilyn worked with Bill Curtinas and later independently on the development and implementation of interventions for promoting identity functioning. Steve, president from 2013 to 2015, Marilyn, president from 2015 to 2017. I owe a special debt of gratitude to them. They put out a call for papers on trauma and identity for a special issue for the Journal of Adolescence. And I don't know quite how I came upon that call for papers, but I thought, I have something to say about that. So I put in a proposal, and it was accepted, and it was the first professional writing that I had done in about 6 years. And once I got started again on professional writing, this is where I live. And so I have continued. ISRI 2023 was the first professional conference I went to after that 6-year hiatus. We see a new paradigm that has emerged for the understanding of identity. I regret I have not, at least as yet, met Dan McAdams, but his work has had a profound influence on the direction of research among people who not only attend this conference, but the contributors to the journal Identity. There's a lot of Marsha identity status presentations this year at ISRI. The Identity Journal, proportionally now, is much more the identity narrative paradigm than the identity status paradigm. By the way, I don't see anything incompatible between the two paradigms. And if there's anybody out here who is looking for a PhD thesis theme, let me suggest to you that doing identity interviews using both the narrative approach and the identity status approach, and looking for both the commonalities and the differences in the way in which that those paradigms fit together, would be a marvelous contribution to the literature. Also, I want to say is doable, and my one piece of advice I often give to, have given to graduate students at major conferences is the purpose of a thesis is to complete it. And we have several leading narrative identity researchers within ISRI. Moyen was president from 2017 to 2019, and again, he and Kate, another landmark publication in the identity literature, the Oxford Handbook of Identity Development, not specifically a narrative focused on narrative identity. They used a debate format, which I was suggesting before, is a really marvelous way to bring out the underlying issues of for different perspectives on the field. Enduring themes in new configurations, identity and intimacy, the contributions of Joe Pittman and Jennifer Kerpelman, another professional couple, by the way. Joe was president of the organization between 2011 and 2013. I'll move a little quickly here. Gender and sexuality as a theme, now being represented quite differently than the early work, which really assumed heterosexual orientations for the large part. If you're going back to research conducted in the 60s and the 70s, we have quite different perspectives now as gender identity and sexual identity is encountering systems of power, and how do they respond to that. Go back just a second on that. Elizabeth Morgan, president from 2019 to 2021. Renee Gallagher from 2021 to 2023. Ethnicity as a theme. Linda introduces the term heritage identity as a different take from what the ethnicity in itself means. It opens up the multiplicity of understandings within the individual regarding ethnic identity. And both Linda and Alan Mecca, interventionists in helping individuals to cope with the stresses associated with multiple identity backgrounds. Particularly close to my interest and concern, lifespan development, and now it's truly longitudinal research that's being conducted and represented here by the work of Leah and Pavi. And last among these themes, the focus on emerging adulthood. This is a term that was introduced by Jeff Arnett maybe 20 years ago or so, Kenneth Keniston in the 1960s coined the term youth to refer to the same age group, but he was focusing quite a lot on disaffected youth and rebels, the student protesters. And the term really didn't stick in the field, but when Jeff introduced it, it was the right person at the right time, and it has had a major impact on the studies of identity, and both Teo and Maria are focused on that area. Which brings me to the future, and I'm nearly finished. Two of my favorite quotations on the future. It is difficult to make predictions, especially about the future, as if you're going to try to predict something else. And the future cannot be predicted, but futures can be invented. You may not recognize the name Denis Gabor. He was the inventor of holography. So this goes back, I think the quote goes actually back to 1960s. Futures cannot be predicted, but they can be invented. So let me see if there's predictions that I can make, and there are two that I can make with absolute certainty. The first of them is that the future starts tomorrow, and the second is the future of ISRI is at this conference. Let's put a little meat on the bones of those predictions. Future starts tomorrow. It starts with what you take away from this conference. Maybe you have been inspired by something and say, wow, this stuff is fascinating. I can learn to do that. I want to do that. Or maybe you have a different reaction. Maybe you heard something at this conference that had you go, whoa, that can't be right. There's got to be a better way of doing this. I should be able to do something better than that. My message to you with whatever your reaction was, and what inspiration or rebuttal is, go for it. It'll help shape the future of the field and the future of the society. And finally, the future is at ISRI at this conference is an obvious statement that is true for the leadership of the organization and the decisions that they make at this point in time going forward. It's obvious a prediction that can be made about those who are the rising leaders of the society and who will be assuming leadership roles in the years immediately ahead. But it's also true for the newly minted PhDs. It's also true for the graduate students who are here. If you choose to stay with identity research, the contributions that you make as you go forward in your careers will be shaping the field and what we know about identity and shaping the future of the organization. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hold it. There you go.
So you mentioned something about the future, and of course, you said let's flesh out those predictions a little bit. But I was curious, what do you think that the future should look at when it comes to identity research?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is trying to integrate different perspectives on identity. There is a tendency among professionals to silo the kinds of research that they do. You grow up within a certain theoretical orientation, and you know how to function as a theorist, as a researcher within a particular tradition. And so you don't tend to think in terms of developing the skills associated with alternative systems for examining the phenomena that are just equally relevant to the kinds of research that you're questioning, because it means learning different theories. It means learning different methodologies and how to use them. So from an advocacy point of view, I think the ability to integrate diverse methodologies and diverse theoretical perspectives would be doing a huge contribution to the field. One of the other directions is I've been doing identity research for so long. What it means to be an adolescent now has changed. The technology of adolescence has changed. And I don't think we really understand how those those technologies are influencing the kinds of identity decisions that are being made. When I was growing up, there was an expectation that individuals would have one or maybe two careers in their lifetime. Now individuals may have 7 or 8 different ways of conceiving themselves as productive within the society. What effect does that have on identity going forward in terms of, first in terms of adolescence and emerging adulthood, in terms of the kinds of choices that you make about education, about what to do immediately after the completion of your education at whatever level that education takes you, and identity then going forward, when you may very well be doing something 5 years from now, if not 3 years from now, that's very different from what you were doing as just before. So how do those identity changes get made? Is there now much more fluidity in identity? We grew up at, the field grew up with exploration and commitment, but commitments now may be something very different than what they once meant, and even exploration may mean something different. How much of choices that people make about lifestyles are a function of what is now available to them that may not have been available to them before. Some thoughts? Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. It was really fascinating and looking back also.
Or at least part of the journey. I was wondering, was Erickson himself ever involved in Marcia's work and following, and what did he think about it, and what did you think about how he thought about it?
Okay. One of the questions that I asked Erickson was specifically on that, what he thought of the empirical research that was being done on the concept of identity. And the answer was a little bit sad. What he said was, it's so limiting. And he's right, or was right. That what we do when we study identity is to extract from it those particular aspects that we are personally most interested in, and we lose the complexity. of the concept in the process. What Erikson did was provide us with a set of conceptual definitions, but he did no research in the traditional sense of that. He did some anthropological work with a number of Native American tribes. But again, his presentation of that is much more holistic, much more impressionistic. And that's very useful, very, very useful. But it is not the type of work that delimits what is the nature of your concept, how is it implementable, and what is the impact of it. For that, you need to have an operational definition. And the people who, Jim Marsha with the Identity Status Interview, and Gerald Adams with the EIS, were providing us with the operational definitions. It's a more limited construct, but when Jim started doing identity interviews, he did just three domains: vocation, religion, and politics. And with college students in the 1960s and 70s, politics was not necessarily an area that generated particular interest. But within a decade, we were doing 7 different domains. And we were finding that everybody's a mixture of identity statuses. You may be achiever in one domain, foreclosed in another, and diffuse in 3 others. So what are you if you can do them all? And the answer, one of the answers that we came up with as part of the discussion is, what area is the most developed? If you can demonstrate that you've explored alternatives and been able to form commitments even in one domain, it shows a degree of complexity of thinking about identity that overrides the fact that in 3 other areas, 3 other domains, you don't care about it at all. And that's fine. And then another approach we used was simply to count up how many areas were you achiever and how many areas were you foreclosed or diffuse and whatever. And you could go with the most frequent of the domains. And the third rule that we used is which was the most salient for you? What did you care about the most? So you might care most about a domain that you were foreclosed in. You could be achieved in something else, but where you really lived was in terms of the domain in which you were foreclosed. Then we'd go with that. And so now we have 3 different rules for deciding an overall identity status. And we came up with the 4th rule: go with the majority of the rules. And it worked. I mean, we got publishable data from that. I was personally not particularly inclined to try for overall identity status. I wanted to know what was happening in each of the domains and to trace out the longitudinal research, not overall status, but status changes within each of the domains. That responsive? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
First of all, I just want to thank you very much for setting the example of allowing critical thoughts and just like everyone coming into the field of identity, just encouraging, stay critical, try new things. I think it's great that you set an example and that we can follow your footsteps on that. And in the line of like giving critical reflections, what is one thing that, looking back at the whole process of identity that we've gone through, that you like and you want to like push forward, like maybe we should do this again? And what is one thing that you're really happy that we left behind?
Well, you've set me up for talking about what I think is most important about the role of identity in psychological well-being. As many of you know, philosophically I'm a eudaemonist and very much believing in the importance of development of one's potentials, which is essentially three things you need to do. First of all, you need to discover what your potentials are. Second, you need to develop the skills to turn those potentials into actual talents and abilities that can be applied. And then you've got to find some way within the social context in which you're functioning to be able to implement and use those talents in ways that you feel are rewarded and expressive of who you are. Jim's work was very much on the level of understanding the processes of identity formation. And one of the things that I took away from that is, okay, we know the processes, but how do we know the differences between good identity decisions and identity decisions that aren't so good? What's the criteria there? So if I wanted to point to something and allow myself to point to my own work in this regard, it would be the research that is looking at the relationship of identity to well-being and what kinds of identities are promoting successful functioning. There are different ways of defining well-being. That's not a matter of concern right here, but recognizing that some things work out well and some things work out poorly, and we need to know, if we're going to do interventions, we need to know what it is that we're trying to have individuals develop. We're not going to be dictating to them, you should do this or you should believe that, but what kinds of questions do you need answers to for you to be able to move forward in the world? The second one, what would I be glad to see left behind? There is a sense that when you look at, again, I'll talk about identity statuses here, but it applies to other areas of identity as well. Of saying there are good identities, good processes, and not so good processes. And one of the earlier findings was that foreclosures are doing every bit as well in life as identity achievers are. And moratoriums have gotten a very bad name because there's so much anxiety going on when you're trying to make identity choices. But I'd remind people that the only way to become an identity achiever is to go through moratorium. So you have to have that passage through the stress and recognizing that you don't necessarily know the answers. And you benefit from even figuring out what the questions are. The talk I gave in Baltimore, I stole the title, but it was Just When I Knew All of Life's Answers, They Changed the Questions. So the process of identity formation, the process of finding ways to live successfully within the social context is not just something for adolescents or for emerging adults or now for established adults or even midlife adults. We're always dealing with those issues. And recognizing that I say the phrase that what I would hope for and what I hope therefore implies what would be avoided is a respect for individual differences in developmental timetables. My background's clinical psych, and one of the perennial questions in the clinical psych is, how do you know when a client is ready to change? And the answer to that question, at least my answer to that question, is when they're changing. And to be a good clinician, you need the ability to ask the right question at the right time. If you ask them the right question too early, they're going to push back. And you're not going to get the change that you would hope for. But if you don't ask the right question, you can't rely on the client to necessarily know what questions to ask. So you've got to ask, you've got to get intuitive enough to recognize the developmental timetable of the individual. And I don't think that we are sufficiently skilled at doing that as identity researchers, and we could do better.
Thank you for the very inspiring presentation as a young scholar. During this conference, I've had several conversations about positionality, so our own backgrounds that we bring into the research and also reflections on this background. And I hear that there are increasingly more people, I think, who are thinking, how can we bring these reflections into our written work? But it can also be difficult. What do you reflect on, and does this fit into all identity research? So what's your take on writing about positionality?
Positionality is the word that you're using. One of the areas of interest for me was in having as undergraduates doing internships, and most of these were clinical internships, and that one of the messages was that who you are and how you present yourself to a client, who may be a psychiatric patient or it may be an adolescent youth group, but you create a set of expectations simply by your age, by your physical appearance, by the way in which you dress, and recognize that you are going to be responded to based upon other people's expectations, often very false expectations, for who you are in the process. But when you respond to somebody else, take the other person's position. Try as much as you can to see this interaction not only from your own perspective, but from the perspective of the other person as well. So what do you cognitively imagine your positionality is with respect to them? And to some extent, you might want to play into that if it's helpful to you, or you may want to dispel them of assumptions that they're making, not by criticizing them or saying you're wrong, but by doing that which is unexpected if you were in the position that they imagine you to be. But you're always going to be in the position that you are, whatever that position actually is, and you want to communicate that as best you can to the person with whom you are you're interacting.
Well, we're well past time, so
Okay.
we will wrap up.
Mind Waterman out. Talks.
What is your motivation and fuel to pursue identity research such a long time as productive research?
Two answers to that question. The answer to the question at the start of my career was that I was trying to understand myself, and I recognize I'm introspective by nature, and trying to understand why I made the decisions that I made and what kinds of processes I was using and what kinds of external influences were acting on me. I'm going to quote a song from Paul Simon, just a short part of it that talks about external influences. I've been mother, fathered, aunt, and uncles. I've been Roy Hollied and Art Garfunkel. And, you know, hey, that whole song is about the external influences on it. What keeps me going? I've had a productive career in terms of publications, and the answer to that is having something to say and keep on saying it for as long as you can. And as long as you feel that what you have to say is something that somebody else might benefit from, and you're getting enough positive feedback to say somebody's out there listening, it keeps you going. And I'm still going. Don't know how much longer, but I'm still